Welcome back to Worlds Beyond with Cam and Ron, everybody.
Hey, welcome back, guys. Glad you're here with us today. And before we dive in, I'd just like to say, if you do enjoy our content, we'd love for you to give us a like and a follow on our Twitter page, which is at worldsb_podcast. And also like or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. It definitely means the world to us. And thanks so much for tuning in.
So we are here today to talk about Loki, a Disney Plus series which just wrapped last week. I was curious whether this was just going to be season 2 and then we'd kind of see how it went and maybe there'd be a season 3. But it definitely seems like that's a wrap on Loki. I don't think they're going to do another season.
Right, yeah, I think I remember Tom Hiddleston saying, kind of making a comment that seemed like he was wrapping up his time as the character. I'm sure he'll be back, especially once we get into Secret Wars and more multiverse shenanigans and stuff, but it seemed like the character arc is officially kind of complete.
Yeah, definitely. So overall, first reactions for me, I would say I enjoyed it. It seemed quick to me. I had to actually go and look back and say, oh, the first season was only 6 episodes too. I remember the first season being, it seemed just longer to me. I'm just noticing, looking here at the Wikipedia, that last season every episode was directed by Kate Herron, and this year they had mostly 2 guys, Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead, directing, and then Dan DeLu, I don't know how you pronounce his name. He was the longtime special effects guy for Marvel, wasn't he?
Yeah, I think so.
And then Kazra Farahani, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly. So there was some different, actually only 2 episodes were directed by somebody different, but that was just something I hadn't noticed before. But overall, enjoyed it. I found it a little quick, and I'll expand on that when we get further into it. I was a little perplexed by how it wrapped up. But I think that's in part because I didn't know if this was going to be it. So that threw me for a loop, I would say, a little bit. I didn't not enjoy it. I thought there was some definite, cool parts about how it all wrapped up, and, it got very deep and cosmic and all that stuff. But yeah, definitely felt a little quick to me, and I was a little bit just surprised by how it wrapped up, and I'll just stop there. I'm not surprised in a bad way, just surprised. So that's my opening take, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I'll have to echo a lot of your thoughts. I really enjoyed it as well. I don't know if I liked it as much as the first season. First season was definitely a lot more straightforward and a little bit more action-packed, I guess, a lot simpler. So it was a little bit easier to follow and went more for kind of a fun, wacky vibe as opposed to this season, which was a little bit... I agree, it felt like it went by quicker, although it was definitely more kind of slow and cerebral in terms of the subject matter. I'm curious how much of this they actually had planned out when they were doing the first season and how much of it was kind of made up after that. But yeah, Justin Benson and Aaron Moorhead are the 2 directors. I've known about them for a little bit because they did a couple kind of low budget horror movies that I really enjoyed. But it is funny, this season of Loki was very time bendy, mind warpy kind of themes and stuff. That they love all that stuff, but they're very much they don't put as much emphasis on the rules and sticking to them as opposed to just kind of getting the most wacky, weird, mind-bending story that they can out of it. So there were definitely a few points where I was a little bit confused and kind of would it really work that way if based on what we know about the multiverse kind of stuff. I won't get too much into that. I'd say that was probably my biggest problem, was it was a lot of very kind of purposefully confusing time shenanigans and alternate dimension kind of stuff. But I think overall it worked very well, especially taking into account how the series wrapped up. So yeah, I enjoyed it overall. It was very well made, just very different and kind of hard to compare to the first season, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, just a brief tangent. So Aaron Moorhead and Justin Benson, are those guys that did those 2 sort of Lovecraftian movies? One was about the UFO cult, and then there was another one about some apartment or something like that. Is that those guys?
Yeah, it's what are those movies? Resolution and The Endless. I really like Resolution. It's like a found footage horror movie, very Lovecraft, but very much they were going for a very specific thing, and the end could either you'll either think it's genius or it's going to piss you off, but they're actually connected. I really like it because The Endless kind of goes back to, they're both kind of time travel-y movies, so they intersect with each other in interesting ways. But yeah, both of them are very much similar to the weird multi-dimensional timeline travel kind of stuff. And again, they focus more on just kind of making weird stuff happen as opposed to logically thinking out the rules and stuff. So that's definitely you could see their handprint on a lot of this, even though it seemed like they didn't have a ton, like it was a different writer, it seemed like for a lot of the episodes. So I'm not sure quite how much like input they had on that, but it seems like they did because it's very much on brand for them.
Okay, maybe. And I see this name Eric Martin as he had a hand in writing all the episodes, and then some other, and he wrote actually 4 of them, 4 out of the 6 he wrote solo. So definitely, I wonder if he's somebody that works with those 2 guys, though. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, and I know they did some work on Moon Knight too.
Oh, interesting.
Which is funny because that also had a kind of weird, confusing element to it, and that wasn't quite as successful as Loki was.
Right. So yeah, I think now to just jump into where we may hit some spoilers. So just that warning is out there now. I do think you bring up a great point that the shift in tone was definitely noticeable. I think last season they had, and it was one of the things I liked about it, they had that sort of like weird, Twilight Zone-y, and the the 1960s aesthetic of the TVA itself. But there were some more straight up sort of actiony episodes. I think like when Loki first arrives in the first season, and they just them hunting him down, that was all very kind of what you would expect. And then as things happened, and then he met Sophie, and they were trying to get to the end of time to figure out who was really behind the TVA. So it had that mystery, that central mystery of who was behind, what is the TVA and who's behind it, and what are they really after. I guess the overall theme of this season was, okay, now we know who's behind the TVA. How do we sort of bring him down or change what he has in store for all of time? But it wasn't quite as definitely wasn't straightforward. Definitely a tonal shift to a much more cerebral, like you said, kind of approach. And I think that by the end of the finale, I was kind of missing some of the lighthearted action. The series had an arc. It went from all over the place. They threw a lot of stuff at you in the first episode, and then there was some sort of fun shenanigans and action, and getting to see Loki and Sophie's powers and using their little green Loki blasts and fights and some cool action and stuff. And then it just from there really focused on Tom Hiddleston and then just him sort of being the one person who could figure this all out. And then he was on his like weird journey.
Yeah, I think this one was definitely more character focused, especially on Loki, obviously, and kind of based on how the season ended. I think that makes a lot of sense because it does in many ways seem to be a wrap up for Loki, especially, it's funny, they kind of had to, obviously they killed Loki in Infinity War, and they kind of had to find a way to bring him back, but he does more or less eventually become the Loki that we know from Infinity War, and then even grows beyond that. So to me it seems like, even though they are technically 2 different Lokis, this seems like it's the wrap up for the entire kind of Loki story, although I'm sure we'll end up seeing him in some capacity again, one way or the other.
That's a great observation. Like, he does sort of become that sympathetic character, both the way his character arc ends in the MCU proper, in Infinity War and here. I was almost surprised, and maybe it was just because there had been so much time that had gone by since the first season. He definitely had this sort of kind of good guy, I'm on the team sort of vibe to him, like right from the get-go as this season took off. And I was like, wow, did he really sort of change his tune, sort of evolve that much into like a straight up, because it almost, that was just the impression I had of him, as like, wow, he's like sort of straight up good guy as we're starting this season. And I didn't know that he had totally, I didn't remember him totally kind of coming over that line watching the last season, but I guess he had, or at least that's the decision they made.
We should probably talk about some of the other characters, especially Kihoi Kwan's character, Obi, or Ouroboros. I thought he was great and kind of funny and quirky and hilarious, and he was a great kind of new addition that fit in really well, and obviously Owen Wilson was great as Mobius, or is it Mobius? Yeah, I guess it's Mobius, not Morbius.
No.
Definitely not. Different Marvel property. And yeah, so both of the were there any other kind of new characters?
Well, just we got more and a very different take from Jonathan Majors as himself. He was the character that we met in flashbacks, or not all flashbacks, in different spots, but then he was his variant, Victor Timely. The rest of the cast, the rest of the principal cast, Kugu Mbatha Raw as Ravonna Renslayer, Winmi Masako as Hunter B-15, Eugene Cordero as Casey, and Sophie DiMartino as Sylvie. She was great. I didn't feel like she had... So everyone, I thought all those guys were strong. It was kind of a good arc for Renslayer, and then that kind of just got left hanging.
That was... Yeah, her end was very strange. It seemed like they just almost like forgot about her, and they just like threw in that last scene with her as a kind of just to wrap it up, but it didn't even... It seemed to imply that she may have like not survived past that, but yeah, that was strange, because it did seem like they were kind of focusing on her a lot in the first half of the season, and they kind of forgot about her.
Yeah, it was really strange. It definitely seemed like there was some plot threads, and that's actually one of the things I want to talk about next, but just to finish off on the cast. So like overall, yeah, I thought the cast was strong. I thought Jonathan Majors, typically, he comes off as so like, kind of like ancient Greek theater actor, like Shakespearean actor. He's got that very like super classical vibe to his acting, and I would say his performances are great, but in the same breath, I almost feel like you can, and I don't mean this necessarily as a criticism or whatever, but like he really feels like he's acting when you watch him. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Right.
And it's not that it's not great, and he has some great moments, but so that leads me, the stuff with Victor Timely and He Who Remains and Sophie and the Renslayer plot thread that just seemed to get left hanging. To me, is attributable to maybe one or two things. I think, going back to my whole thing about, I wasn't sure whether this was going to be the final season or not. I get the impression, by the way the story wrapped up and the way this season went, I think we got something of a condensed arc of what ultimately might have been another season or more episodes. It definitely... I'm not going to go Game of Thrones final season thing on it, where everything got condensed, but it seemed like maybe they were going to ultimately get to this whole point of Loki being sort of almost like the watcher of the TVA, becoming this like, cosmic figure that kind of manages all the strands of time. It felt like there was going to be more story there.
Right.
With Victor Timely, with the other variants of Kang, just the whole arc with Renslayer, everything felt like, okay, we'll give him a little bit of action and a little bit of here's this variant of He Who Remains, and then they just sort of jumped right into this sort of final cerebral arc of Loki's evolution into, again, whatever he's like now, the Timekeeper. And so I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Do you feel, have you read anything that indicates that, or did you get any kind of similar feelings of things being sort of condensed and maybe this was supposed to be a longer story?
It's funny you bring that up, because I've seen a few things. One, obviously one of the big things I've seen is obviously reshoots have been a big point of contention and drama for the MCU recently. I've read that Loki did not require any reshoots, and that's kind of like a big online, that's kind of a big selling point for a lot of people, like saying, oh, well, Loki was very good and it didn't require any reshoots, so it just kind of proves that you just need to have a good solid plan of where you're going to go from the very beginning. But on the other hand, I've read that originally Loki was going to repair the time loom and it was going to work. and he wouldn't have ended up in kind of the ultimate spot that he did end up in. But what's strange to me is that seems to imply that there would have been reshoots, but I don't know. I don't know if maybe they just brought, because I mean, where Loki ends up would have been very easy to just bring him into a room with a green screen and just shoot him for a day, and so maybe they didn't do full on reshoots, but they just brought him in to make that ending. But long story short, yeah, I do think that there may have been plans to go further, a third season, or at least the movie or the show would have ended differently. That being said, I kind of like where it ended up. I think it almost makes Loki into a true god. His kind of job as manager of all the timelines and stuff. But yeah, no, it seems like this had probably, especially compared to some of the other recent MCU stuff, it probably had the least amount of post tampering, but it does seem like there may have been a little bit of it.
Yeah, you could almost go both ways with that. Is it like, did it not get reshoots because it didn't need reshoots, or did it not get reshoots because they pulled the plug on it and they said wrap it up in season 2?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So like, I can see, and because yeah, I got a very strong sense as soon as you said that just jumped out of my head. I was like, yeah, it really seemed like everything was pointing them towards fixing the timeline, and then more just shenanigans with more variants of, or maybe Victor Timely escapes and goes off into the wilderness or whatever. But the whole thing where, so Victor Timely, that one version of him after Loki tries over and over again, and they seemingly fix the loom, and then they don't. But then when he goes to that place where he's back with He Who Remains at that little castle at the end of time there.
Castle, yep, yeah.
So Loki, ultimately, he figures out all his stuff, and he's like, I'm going to find a better way, and then he does, and then. So did he destroy Kang? Is Kang gone?
Right, yeah, I guess that's the implication.
Because there was never any final battle between him, but it just seems like he just sort of somehow unraveled Kang without any real conflict, and now he's the time guy, and Kang's just gone. And that leads me to my other sort of supposition is because of the problems Jonathan Majors is having, you're hearing everywhere that they're trying to kind of wrap up the whole Kang thing and go in a different direction now. And so I wonder if that was part of it too.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is I do think if there was any sort of tampering or minor reshoots, I think it was probably to lessen Kang's overall impact. And it is funny, there is that kind of throwaway line at the end where they're like, oh, we're tracking Kang variants, and they even mention, presumably, Quantumania's version of Kang. They say, oh, there was a Kang defeat on 616 or something like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
So it's weird that they didn't drop it completely, but it almost seems like they do have a kind of a choice now. They can either lean farther into Kang or go a different way, based on where Loki ended up. But, and this is, I don't know if this is getting too far off the beaten track, but I do know that Deadpool 3 is going to have a very heavy TVA Kang influence, to the point where I think Deadpool is going to be working with the TVA to defeat Kang or something like that. Obviously, the details are a little hazy at the moment, but I'm just curious if they're going to lean into Kang and Deadpool. That seems to kind of go against all the rumors that they're trying to pivot away from Kang. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes.
Yeah, so that's the thing. So it's funny, I didn't read any reviews or anything, but I did go online after I watched it to just see what people's, just fan reaction was. And I was, a lot of people, wow, that was so deep and cosmic and whatever. And I was a little bit yeah, I see that. And I did enjoy it. And overall it did hang together. But like I said, I was kind of a little bit that's the way they decided to end it.
Yeah, no, I kind of feel the same way. Although, yeah, I think since it ended up working, and I did feel kind of a good emotional hit at the end of the story, I think it ended up working, and that's probably what people are reacting to. But I could see a different or like my dad, your brother, he hates anything to do with time travel or multiple realities.
Yeah.
I don't even think he would make it through the season. And I think, yeah, it kind of, your enjoyment of it will be based on your patience for the time travel tropes and alternate dimension gimmicks. I guess getting into some maybe criticisms I had before we wrap up, that would probably be my main one, is it seemed like a lot of stuff was like, I don't know how to describe it, but like in the last episode they kept sending Victor Timely into the time zone over and over again to kind of hit that classic time travel repeat loop joke. But it seemed weird, like Loki kept, it didn't set up that there needed to, like, that Timely needed to go out there. You would think Loki would have tried different elements, but it was more just like, oh, he just has to get there as fast as possible. But it's like, it seemed like they were really spinning the wheels, but they could have tried other things, or Loki could have gone out.
Yeah,
instead.
I thought Loki was going to go that next time, and then
right. It just seemed like they did that repeat thing, but it didn't make sense that they kept sending Victor Timely out. So I wasn't quite sure what they were going for there. And then, yeah, there was a lot of things kind of like based on the rules, or like they never established that, like it has to go this way in order for the timeline to continue. So it just seemed weird that they kept sending him out. And there were a few things in the last episode that just felt a little bit kind of like, why are we doing this again?
Right, and when Loki finally figured out how to control his time jumping, that was one thing that was just a little bit just sitting and watching it. His time, the time jump effect, when he would just splatter and like,
right,
that was a little bit like, I was like, okay, can we stop that now? I'm gonna have a mental breakdown. It was like,
well, yeah, it was
like,
weird.
It became annoying after a while.
Well, actually, it's funny you bring that up, because I was a little bit confused. It seemed like they fixed that at the end of the first episode, and I was kind of like, it's strange that they would set that such a big kind of issue up and then just have it resolve in the first episode. But then it does eventually come back and have some sort of bearing on, and then obviously there's the whole time loop where the first episode is affected by the future of the last episode, et cetera, which was all cool, but yeah, I started to kind of lose the thread a little bit.
That stuff. So I would say for this show it overall worked, but yeah, that is something that, when done well and not repeated over and over again, like I think I've said this on other podcast episodes when we've talked about shows or movies that have had similar themes, like that whole the living the day over again, like TV episode, like, I mean, that, how many times has that been done? And they stayed away from going full on in that direction in Loki,
right?
But it was getting dangerously close,
right? Yep, yeah, and I was thankful that they mostly just condensed that into more of like a montage than it was like a full episode dedicated to it. But yeah, if you don't have the patience for that kind of stuff, it might not land quite as well for you. But I think it did its job, and I ended up liking it.
Yeah, I would say my overall sort of final position or whatever. Yeah, I enjoyed season 2. I thought it was, a good way to wrap up the character. Obviously, they are starting to really wrap up some of these phase 1, 2, and 3 characters are starting to get really phased out. So in that sense, it was satisfying. Looking at the show as a show overall, I think I enjoyed season 1 more than season 2. And they did sort of even build this like that it was like gonna be more of this sort of procedural that like ultimately Mobius and Loki were, and they did to some degree, were gonna become these sort of like kind of like detectives, if you will, almost like for the TVA. And it kind of went that way a little bit as the season went on in season 1. It dipped into that a little bit at the beginning of season 2, but it never really, I know the intention when the show first debuted was for it to kind of have that sort of vibe, but it never really totally went in that direction.
Right.
So yeah, overall enjoyed it. I think overall it definitely, when looking at the Marvel series it definitely is one of the most consistently solid
Right.
of the Disney Plus series. I will say.
Yeah, no, I think I have to agree with that, and I don't think I have very much else to say about it. I think we pretty much covered all my thoughts.
So that's a wrap on Loki. Coming up right on the heels of Loki, we are going to do The Marvels, which just came out 2 weeks ago. A lot of swirling sort of stuff going on. Drama going on outside of the movie itself. So we'll touch on some of that and other stuff coming up. The Monarch series, Monsterverse thing on Apple TV just started. Definitely going to cover that. The new Japanese Toho Studios Godzilla film, Godzilla -1, comes out in the U.S. on December 1st. Very excited about that. There's a couple of seasonal horror movies coming up. I know you saw one. I'm going to be seeing the Thanksgiving film tomorrow or Friday sometime soon. And then there's a couple of Christmas-themed ones coming out too, so we'll definitely do something on those. So lots of stuff.
Yeah, it's been a pretty dense holiday season in terms of genre things dropping, so it's good for us, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up, just a reminder, if you enjoyed this episode, please do give us a like and a follow on our Twitter, X, whatever they're calling it these days, page, at worldsb_podcast, and a like or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. It does mean the world to us. And thanks again for listening. And I will also throw in my Lockwood & Co. plug. Read the books by Jonathan Stroud, watch the show, sign the petition online, and participate in that. I know there's going to be a big banner at the LA Comic-Con, and
nice.
Get some attention there for the show, and hopefully it gets picked up very soon for more seasons. And with that, we will bid you adieu.
Thanks for listening, guys, and see you on the next one.